There are movies that are simply successful, but there are also movies that become part of the memory of an entire generation. To me, Grease, 1978, belongs to the second group. Every time the melody of Summer Nights or You Are the One That I Want plays, it feels like a whole era of Hollywood youth comes back to life. The interesting thing is that the appeal of Grease has never only been in the catchy songs or the love story between Danny and Sandy. What keeps the movie alive, in my opinion, lies in the things the audience never sees behind the camera. Behind the smiles, the energetic dances, and the vibrant atmosphere of the 50s are countless unexpected incidents, risky decisions, unintended accidents, and even secrets that many longtime fans have never heard of. What I like the most is that the more I look into it, the more I realize that many iconic moments of Grease were not planned from the beginning. Sometimes, the very things that seem wrong create a magic that no perfect script could ever write. Today, let us go back to Rydell High to explore 15 secrets and behind-the-scenes incidents that helped turn Grease into one of the most beloved musical movies of all time. I believe that after this video, your next time watching Grease will not be the same as before. The student gang oozed the smell of paying income tax. If you have ever watched Grease and told yourself that these high school students look so mature, believe me, you are not imagining it. One of the funniest secrets of the film is that many high school students were actually at an age where in real life they could be paying taxes, paying mortgages, or taking their children to school. Today, Hollywood often tries to find actors as close to the character age as possible. But in the late 1970s, things were completely different. Producers prioritized experience, professionalism, and the ability to withstand a shooting schedule that lasted for months. So, the audience got the most special high school class in cinematic history. John Travolta, who was only 23 years old at the time, became one of the youngest in the main cast. Meanwhile, Stockard Channing was 33 years old when playing the rebellious Rizzo. The detail that makes me laugh the most is the case of Jamie Donnelly. At the age of 30, she started having gray hair, and every morning the makeup team had to blacken her hair roots before the cameras started rolling. It is hard to believe. But the interesting thing is that despite knowing this truth, I still completely believe they are teenagers of Rydell High School. Perhaps that is the magic of Grease. The film does not sell the audience absolute authenticity about age. It sells us the feeling of youth. And that feeling is so strong that nearly 50 years later, many people still do not realize that the kids on screen have actually been adults for a long time. I am curious if the first time you watched Grease, you ever noticed this? Or, like me, it took many years to be startled upon learning the real age of the cast. R. The terrifying nightmare from the legendary leather pants. If there is a single outfit that represents Grease, I believe many people will immediately think of the image of Sandy stepping out in tight black leather pants with confident eyes at the end of the film. It was not just an outfit. It was the moment a movie character was etched into pop culture. But what the audience did not see is that behind that attractive appearance was a total nightmare for Olivia Newton-John. The leather pants she wore were actually a vintage item from the 1950s, and its zipper was no longer working. Instead of finding a more modern solution, the wardrobe department decided to sew Olivia directly into the pants every day before shooting. It sounds funny, but try to imagine having to stand, sit, and dance for many hours in a state where you almost cannot take off your outfit. Because she dreaded having to undo the stitches and sew them back, Olivia even limited drinking water throughout the shooting day. For me personally, this is a perfect example showing that sometimes iconic on-screen moments are created from sacrifices that the audience never knows about. Interestingly, decades later, those pants were sold for more than $162,000. From an item that made the actress miserable for many shooting days, it became a Hollywood treasure. I wonder if the first time you saw Sandy appear in that outfit, you thought you were witnessing one of the most famous costumes in cinematic history? Sen. The smelly nightmare in the ballroom. Whenever I watch the dance contest in Grease again, I always feel it is the perfect embodiment of youthful joy. Vibrant music, energetic dance moves, and smiles appearing on the faces of almost every character. But the truth behind it is far different from what the audience saw. The film crew had to shoot this scene for many days in a gymnasium with no air conditioning in the middle of the California summer. The temperature rose terribly under the heat of dozens of high-power spotlights. What surprised me the most was that the crew also had to endure a foul smell from a nearby slaughterhouse. They faced a less than pleasant choice: open the windows for air but smell the unpleasant odor, or keep them closed and endure the heat like in an oven. Perhaps that is why every time I see the glistening sweat on screen, I no longer think of it as a cinematic effect. It was real sweat. It was real exhaustion. Michael Tucci even had to be hospitalized for dehydration. Sometimes the authenticity in a film comes from things the audience never gets to see. Sue. Princess Leia and Good Girl Marie almost played Sandy. One of the most interesting things when looking back at classic movies is imagining the parallel versions that could have happened. And the role of Sandy in Grease specifically is perhaps the most fascinating example. Marie Osmond was once invited to join, but she declined because she disagreed with the character transformational journey at the end of the film. To be honest, I quite respect that decision. It shows she put her personal beliefs above a massive career opportunity. After that, the director also considered Carrie Fisher before she became a legend with the role of Princess Leia. Just imagining Carrie Fisher in the world of Grease is enough to make me curious. But in the end, destiny chose Olivia Newton-John. The interesting thing is that the film crew even had to change the character background to match her natural accent. Sandy went from being an American girl to a transfer student from Australia. It is a small detail, but it changed the entire feel of the character. And looking back today, it is hard to imagine anyone else who could bring the tenderness, purity, and charm to Sandy just like Olivia did. Woo! The Sandy is Dead conspiracy theory and the flying car. If there is one scene in Grease that has made audiences debate for decades, it is definitely the moment the car at the end of the film suddenly flies into the sky. When I was a kid, I simply thought it was a happy and slightly crazy ending. But the internet age has turned everything into a topic for analysis. From there emerged the famous theory that Sandy actually drowned at the beginning of the movie. The entire love story afterward was just a dream before she left this world, and the flying car was the image of her ascending to heaven. To be honest, the first time I read this theory, I both laughed and felt a bit chilled. The interesting thing is that creator Jim Jacobs completely rejected that idea and said that whoever came up with that theory must have been in a very creative state. But I think the vitality of the story lies elsewhere. A movie only truly becomes a legend when the audience still wants to discuss it decades later. And what about you when you look at the car flying into the sky? Do you see it as the magic of youth or simply a fun prank of 1970s Hollywood? Leo. The creepy coincidence named Elvis Presley. This is one of those behind-the-scenes stories that the more I look into it, the more I find it like a moment stepping out of Hollywood itself rather than real life. When Grease was still in pre-production, the name the filmmakers wanted for the role of Teen Angel was none other than Elvis Presley. Just imagining it is interesting enough. Try to picture Elvis appearing amid white smoke, singing his heart out in the song Beauty School Dropout. Surely, that would be one of the most memorable moments in musical film history. But ultimately, that did not happen as Elvis declined the invitation. What makes this story even more special comes from an almost unbelievable coincidence. On the day the film crew was shooting the famous slumber party scene, in which Rizzo playfully sang the line, "Elvis, Elvis, let me be," the news of Elvis Presley passing suddenly appeared on news broadcasts across America. I think those who are old enough to remember that day will understand that feeling. Elvis was not just a singer. He was a part of youth, of memories, and of an entire era. So when the crew was shooting a scene mentioning Elvis exactly on the day he died, many people on the team truly felt a chill down their spines. Even today, this remains one of the weirdest coincidences associated with Grease. And I want to ask you one thing. If Elvis really took the role of Teen Angel, would that moment become an even more iconic movie scene than the version we know today? C. The ending carnival and the 20-minute quick fix. If forced to choose a scene that leaves audiences walking out of the theater with a smile on their lips, I think many people would choose the "You are the one that I want" segment. That is the moment everything in Grease exploded. Music, colors, energy, and joy seemed to blend into one. The unbelievable thing is that this scene almost did not exist as we know it today. The song was added quite late in the production process, and choreographer Pat Birch had only about 20 minutes to arrange all the dance steps in the carnival area. 20 minutes! Just thinking about it makes me feel the pressure. There is one thing I always love about Hollywood in that era. Not everything was perfect from the beginning. Sometimes the most classic moments emerged from last-minute improvisation. Even Eddie Deason, who played Eugene, was spun on the Ferris wheel so much that he had to run and vomit immediately after completing the scene. And that is what makes me smile. When watching this movie scene, the audience sees joy. But behind that joy is a group of artists trying to turn chaos into cinematic magic. Bye. The box office record dominating for 40 years. One thing I always like when looking back at Hollywood history is that experts are not always right. And Grease is a perfect testament to that. When the film was released, quite a few critics gave it a rather cold reception. Some people thought it was just a simple teen story with catchy songs. But the audience thought completely differently. They flocked to theaters time and time again. With a budget of about $6 million, Grease created a box office earthquake. Not only did it far exceed expectations, but it also defeated many heavyweight competitors of that year and held the position of the highest-grossing live-action musical in America for nearly 4 decades. This always makes me smile. Because ultimately, the thing that determines the lifespan of a movie is not the review in the press, it is the affection of the audience. And clearly, millions of people found something very special in Grease. Do you remember the first time you watched this movie? Sometimes the audience memories are the greatest reward a work can receive. Joe. The Fonz rejected the fateful role. This is one of those stories that always makes me believe Hollywood is built from very small turning points of fate. With just a different decision, cinematic history could have changed completely. At the time Grease was produced, Henry Winkler was one of the most famous faces in America thanks to his role as Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli in Happy Days. With a leather jacket, slicked back hair, and a captivating rebellious image, he was almost the perfect choice for Danny Zuko. However, that very thing made Winkler worried. He feared that if he continued to take on a similar role, audiences would forever only see him as Fonzie under a different name. Looking back, I truly understand that decision. Any actor wants to prove they have more colors than a single image. But the interesting thing is that the door Winkler closed became the golden door opening for John Travolta. And the rest is history. I always smile when I hear the famous quote Winkler shared years later. He said he went home and drank a glass of orange juice, while Travolta went home and bought a private jet. That is a very humorous but also very honest perspective on a missed opportunity. Try to imagine if Henry Winkler took the role of Danny, would Grease still have the special appeal as we remember today? Or simply, a classic movie sometimes just needs the right person at the right time. Sure, the biological river under the Thunder Road Bridge. Every time I rewatch the Thunder Road racing scene, I think most audiences only see the speed, music, and excitement of youth. It is one of the most iconic segments of Grease. But behind those energetic frames is a little-known story of the endurance and dedication of the entire film crew. The location for this scene was the Los Angeles riverbed. It sounds poetic, but in reality, it is a giant concrete drainage system under the harsh sun of Southern California. Stagnant water, mud, and all sorts of bacteria created an environment that was far from ideal for filming. Every time a car rushed by, dirty water splashed onto the actors and crew members. What truly moves me is the story of Annette Charles. While audiences only saw her appear for a few moments on screen, in real life she was enduring severe pain due to an ectopic pregnancy. Yet she still managed to be present to complete the scene before having to be hospitalized for emergency surgery the very same day. Sometimes we watch a classic movie and think the magic lies in the script or the music. But for me, the real magic lies in the people behind the camera. Those who accept fatigue, pain, and sacrifice to create a few cinematic minutes that the audience will remember for decades. Have you ever watched a movie scene that, after learning the behind-the-scenes story, suddenly became much more meaningful? Shri. The stealing of the catchy song. In cinematic history, there are small decisions that create huge changes. The story of Grease Lightning is a perfect example. If sticking strictly to the Broadway musical, this song originally belonged to Kennedy, that makes complete sense because the car was his pride. But when the film was made, John Travolta was at the peak of his fame after the success of Saturday Night Fever, and he wanted to sing that song. As a result, Danny became the performer of the song, while Kennedy had to step back. Honestly speaking, I always feel a bit of sympathy for Jeff Conaway when reading this story. He used to play Danny on stage. When it came to the movie version, he lost the main role. Then he also lost the most prominent song of the character he was playing. But this is also an interesting lesson about Hollywood. Talent is very important, but sometimes box office appeal has its own voice. Try to think about it. If Kennedy sang Greased Lightning, would that song be as famous as it is today? Or was it the presence of Travolta that turned it into a pop culture icon? Sure are. The hit song Hopelessly Devoted to You was a forced product. There are songs created from artistic inspiration, and there are also songs created because of contract clauses. The wonderful thing is that sometimes the final result far exceeds all expectations. Initially, Grease did not have the song Hopelessly Devoted to You at all. But Olivia Newton-John was a huge music star, and her contract required her to have a separate solo song. Therefore, when the film was nearly finished, the producers hurriedly found a way to add an extra track. What I find interesting is that the circumstances of the song Birth did not have the markings of a masterpiece at all. It was written quite hastily. Many other actors had finished their work and left the crew. That is the reason Sandy appeared alone in that famous scene. But sometimes cinema has a very strange way of telling stories. It was this last-minute added song that became the only track from Grease to receive an Oscar nomination. Every time I hear Olivia raise her voice in that scene, I always feel there is something very authentic. Perhaps because amidst a film full of color and energy, this is a rare moment where Sandy gets to reveal her heart. And sometimes the most sincere moments emerge from seemingly reluctant decisions. Chassin. The Coca-Cola logo cover-up battle. This is one of those details that I bet many viewers have seen but never really noticed. If you watch the scenes in the Frosty Palace closely, sometimes you will catch strangely blurred areas of the image. Today we are used to perfect digital effects, so those blurs look a bit funny. But behind them is a very Hollywood story. When the crew was filming, many Coca-Cola logos appeared in the background. The problem was that producer Alan Carr had a promotional relationship with Pepsi. By the time the mistake was realized, it was too late. The scene was finished, the actors had moved on to other schedules, and reshooting was almost impossible. What I like about this story is that it reminds us that cinema, before the digital age, was not perfect. Small mistakes still existed and were sometimes kept forever. Instead of decreasing the value of the film, they make the work more relatable. Have you ever watched an old movie and suddenly discovered such lovely little flaws? Chassis. The original dark script, Danny intended to commit suicide. This is perhaps the fact that amazed me the most on today's list. We usually remember Grease as a movie filled with sunshine, music, and sweet youthful memories. Therefore, it is hard to imagine that there was a time this project went in a completely opposite direction. In an early development version, director Ralph Bakshi envisioned the story in a much darker and more adult-oriented style. According to that idea, Danny Zuko did not have a happy ending. Instead, the character fate would come to a tragic end. Every time I read about this detail, I think of an interesting question. How many classic movies that we love today are just a few decisions away from failure? If the project had gone just a little differently, Grease might have become a movie that audiences watch once and forget, instead of a cultural phenomenon spanning many generations. Sometimes, success does not just lie in what is added. It also lies in the ideas that are removed at the right time. Shiwu. The Pink Ladies' jackets were almost very plain. Try to imagine a world where the Pink Ladies group did not wear those striking pink jackets. Just hearing it feels like something is wrong, right? The interesting thing is that initially the costume designer wanted to use more realistic color tones to accurately reflect the 1950s teen style. If that plan had been carried out, maybe everything would have looked much more faded. Fortunately, director Randall Kleiser had a completely different vision. He did not want Grease to become a history lesson. He wanted it to be like a beautiful memory magnified through the lens of nostalgia. So the vibrant pink of the Pink Ladies was kept. I think this is the reason Grease remains appealing today. The film does not try to recreate the past with absolute accuracy. It recreates the feeling of the past, and that feeling is always much more vivid than reality. Looking back, the Pink Ladies' jackets have become a pop culture icon. Sometimes, just one decision about color can also change cinematic history. And it is hard to believe that symbol almost did not exist. Those are 15 secrets and behind-the-scenes incidents that contributed to creating the Grease legend. What makes the movie special is not just the timeless music or the romantic love story, but also the spontaneity, passion, and effort of the entire crew behind the camera. Perhaps that is why, after almost half a century, Grease still makes many people smile every time they watch it again. If you know another interesting detail about the movie, please share it in the comments section. And do not forget to press like and subscribe to the channel to explore more fascinating behind-the-scenes stories of other classic movies.